The slave market on Zerion Prime buzzed with the usual crowd of traders, bounty hunters, and wealthy collectors looking for exotic specimens. Marcus Chen wiped grease from his hands as he walked through the cramped stalls, having just finished repairs on his Epherian merchant's cargo hauler. The acrid smell of alien sweat and fear hung heavy in the recycled air. Marcus had seen plenty of disturbing things in his 3 years working the outer rim stations, but the slave markets always made his stomach turn. Humans weren't the only species being sold here. Dozens of sentient races were chained and caged like animals. The Galactic Council claimed slavery was illegal, but enforcement was laughable this far from the core worlds. As he pushed through the crowd, a particular auction caught his attention. The auctioneer, a tall Vrakian with purple scales, held up a small cage containing what looked like a white furry creature no bigger than a house cat. The thing cowered in the corner, its red eyes wide with terror. "What am I bid for this rare albino Fenrisian wolf pup?" the auctioneer called out in galactic standard. "These creatures are prized for their loyalty and intelligence. This specimen is young enough to be properly trained." Marcus had heard of Fenrisian wolves before. They were native to the ice world of Fenris and were known to be highly intelligent pack hunters. Adult wolves stood nearly 4 feet tall and were fiercely protective of their families. But this tiny creature looked nothing like the fearsome predators he'd read about in xenobiology texts. The bidding was lackluster. Most aliens in the crowd seemed unimpressed by the small, trembling animal. A Kuran trader offered 50 credits. A Thraxian collector countered with 75. The bids crawled upward slowly, reaching only 200 credits. "Come now," the auctioneer pressed. "Fenrisian wolves are extinct in the wild. This may be your only chance to own such a rare specimen." Marcus found himself stepping closer to get a better look. The pup was indeed albino. Its fur was pure white except for a few gray patches around its ears. But what struck him most were its eyes. They weren't the typical red of an albino animal. Instead, they were a brilliant ice blue, and they seemed to hold an intelligence that made Marcus's chest tighten. The creature's gaze met his through the bars of the cage, and Marcus saw something that made his blood boil. This wasn't just an animal being sold. This was a child, a sentient being no different from a human infant, torn from its family and put up for auction like a piece of property. 250 credits, called out a Nexarian in expensive robes. The crowd murmured approval. Nexarians were known for their exotic pet collections, and most aliens considered this a reasonable price for such a rare specimen. Marcus watched the pup flinch at the Nexarian's voice. He'd heard stories about Nexarian pet owners. They weren't cruel by intention, but they treated even sentient species like elaborate toys, keeping them in gilded cages for entertainment. This wolf pup would live its entire life as a curiosity, never knowing the freedom of running with a pack or the simple dignity of making its own choices. "Going once," the auctioneer announced. Marcus found his hand rising before he could stop himself. 500 credits. The crowd turned to stare at him. Humans weren't common in this part of the galaxy, and most aliens considered them to be barely above primitive. A few Korans chittered what sounded like laughter. The Nexarian's eye stalk swiveled toward Marcus, sizing him up. 600, the alien bid calmly. Marcus felt his credit stick in his pocket. He'd been saving for months to buy passage to the inner systems where he could find better work. The credits represented his escape from this lawless frontier. But looking at the terrified pup, he couldn't bring himself to walk away. 800 credits, Marcus called out, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet auction floor. The Nexarian paused, considering. 800 credits was far more than any reasonable person would pay for an exotic pet, especially one that might not even survive to adulthood. After a moment, the alien's eye stalks drooped in resignation. "Going once, going twice, sold to the human for 800 credits, the auctioneer announced with obvious satisfaction. As Marcus made his way to the payment counter, he wondered what the hell he'd just gotten himself into. He was a mechanic, not a pet owner. He lived in a cramped apartment above a repair shop and barely made enough to keep himself fed. What was he going to do with a wolf pup? But when he reached for the cage and saw the way the little creature looked at him, not with the blank stare of an animal, but with the grateful expression of someone who recognized a friend, Marcus knew he'd made the right choice. The pup didn't try to bite when Marcus gently lifted it from the cage. Instead, it curled up in his arms, its small body trembling with exhaustion and relief. As they left the slave market together, Marcus made a silent promise to the small creature nestled against his chest. He might not know much about raising alien wolves, but he'd figure it out. And whatever it took, he'd make sure this little one never saw the inside of a cage again. Marcus's apartment above the repair shop wasn't much to look at, but it was clean and warm. He set the wolf pup down gently on his worn sofa and watched as the tiny creature sniffed cautiously at the unfamiliar surroundings. The pup was even smaller than he'd thought, probably only a few weeks old and weighing no more than 3 pounds. "Okay, little guy," Marcus said softly, settling into a chair across from the sofa. "First things first, you need a name." The pup's ears perked up at the sound of his voice. Those remarkable blue eyes fixed on Marcus with an intensity that was both fascinating and slightly unnerving. There was definitely intelligence there, far beyond what any earth animal possessed. "How about Snow?" Marcus suggested. The pup tilted its head but showed no particular reaction. "No? Okay, what about Ghost?" Again, no response. Marcus scratched his beard thoughtfully. "Blaze for your eyes?" At the word Blaze, the pup's tail gave a tiny wag. Marcus grinned. Blaze it is. The next challenge was food. Marcus had no idea what Fenrisian wolves ate, especially pups this young. He rummaged through his small kitchen, eventually settling on some synthesized protein paste mixed with water. It wasn't appetizing, but it was nutritious and easy to digest. To his surprise, Blaze approached the bowl eagerly and began eating with obvious hunger. The pup had probably been underfed in captivity. As Marcus watched Blaze eat, he noticed something odd. The pup kept glancing up at him as if making sure Marcus wasn't going to take the food away. "It's okay," Marcus said gently. "There's plenty more where that came from." Over the next few hours, Marcus began to realize just how unusual his new companion was. Blaze seemed to understand not just the tone of Marcus's voice, but actual words. When Marcus said stay, the pup remained perfectly still. When he said come, Blaze trotted over immediately. Most remarkably, Blaze appeared to be learning new words in real time. Marcus would name an object: water, bed, door, and the pup would look directly at the item in question, as if filing the information away for future use. The real test came that evening when Marcus was working on a particularly stubborn engine component. He'd spread parts across his workbench, trying to figure out why a fusion coupling kept overheating. Blaze had been napping on the sofa but suddenly stood up and walked over to the workbench. The pup sniffed at various components, then picked up a small wrench in its mouth and carried it over to Marcus. It wasn't the tool Marcus needed at that moment, but it was the right size for the bolt he'd been struggling with earlier. "How did you know?" Marcus asked in amazement. Blaze simply wagged his tail and returned to watching Marcus work. Over the next hour, the pup continued to anticipate Marcus's needs, bringing him tools and even nudging certain components when they seemed to be giving Marcus trouble. Word of Marcus's unusual purchase spread quickly through the station's small human community. Jake Morrison, who ran the cantina down the corridor, stopped by the next morning with a concerned expression. "Marcus, what the hell were you thinking?" Jake demanded, eyeing Blaze warily. "That thing's gonna grow up to be a monster. Fenrisian wolves are apex predators." "He's not a thing," Marcus replied calmly, watching as Blaze investigated a pile of spare parts. "His name is Blaze, and he's not going to hurt anyone." "How can you be so sure?" "He's an alien predator, not a pet dog." Marcus was about to respond when Blaze suddenly sat up straight, his ears swiveling toward the door. A moment later, they heard heavy footsteps in the corridor outside. Blaze moved protectively between Marcus and the door, a low growl rumbling in his small chest. The footsteps passed by without stopping, but Marcus noticed how Blaze had positioned himself. The pup hadn't just sensed potential danger, he'd actively moved to protect Marcus from it. "Did you see that?" Marcus asked Jake. "He's trying to protect me." Jake frowned. "Or he's being territorial about his new food source." But Marcus knew better. There had been something almost human in the way Blaze had responded to potential threat. The pup wasn't acting on instinct alone. He was thinking, planning, making conscious decisions about how to keep his new friend safe. That afternoon, Marcus decided to test his theory. He took Blaze down to the station's common area, a large space where humans and aliens alike came to socialize and conduct business. The moment they entered, conversation stopped. Dozens of alien eyes turned to stare at the unlikely pair. A group of Thraxian traders whispered among themselves, their clicking language too fast for Marcus to follow. Near the bar, several Corans pointed and chittered what sounded like amusement, but Marcus noticed that Blaze showed no fear. Instead, the pup walked calmly beside him, head held high, meeting the stares of creatures 10 times his size with steady composure. When they reached an empty table, Blaze hopped up onto the chair beside Marcus and sat quietly, observing everything around him with those piercing blue eyes. It was the behavior of a confident, intelligent being, not a frightened animal. A Vrakian merchant approached their table, his purple scales shimmering under the artificial lights. "Human," he said in accented standard. "That is valuable creature you have. I offer good price, 1,000 credits. "He's not for sale," Marcus replied firmly. The Vrakian's eyes narrowed. "Everything has price. 2,000 credits, final offer." Before Marcus could respond, Blaze stood up on his chair and fixed the Vrakian with an intense stare. The pup didn't growl or bare his teeth. He simply looked at the merchant with an expression that somehow conveyed absolute refusal. The Vrakian took a step back, clearly unnerved. "Strange creature," he muttered and quickly moved away. Marcus looked down at Blaze in amazement. "You understood that entire conversation, didn't you?" Blaze's tail wagged once, and those intelligent eyes met Marcus's with what looked remarkably like a smile. 3 weeks after bringing Blaze home, Marcus discovered just how extraordinary his companion truly was. The pup had grown significantly, now standing nearly a foot tall and showing the lean muscle definition that would eventually make him a formidable predator. But it wasn't Blaze's physical development that amazed Marcus, it was his mental capabilities. Marcus had been working late on a damaged hyperdrive when he heard a series of soft beeps coming from his computer terminal. He looked over to see Blaze sitting in front of the screen, his paw resting on the keyboard. The display showed a detailed schematic of the very engine Marcus had been struggling to repair. "Blaze, how did you—" Marcus trailed off, staring at the screen in disbelief. The schematic wasn't just random. It was a precise technical diagram highlighting the exact component that had been giving Marcus trouble. The wolf pup looked back at him with those penetrating blue eyes, then gently pawed at a specific section of the diagram. Marcus followed his indication and realized that Blaze had identified a microfracture in the dilithium housing that Marcus's own scanners had missed. "You can read," Marcus whispered. "You actually understand these technical specifications?" Blaze's tail wagged and he turned back to the computer. With careful movements of his paws, he began pulling up additional files, maintenance protocols, parts catalogs, even shipping manifests for replacement components. Each document was directly relevant to the repair Marcus was attempting. Word of Blaze's abilities spread quickly through the station's technical community. At first, most people assumed Marcus was exaggerating, or that the wolf was simply performing trained tricks. That changed when Chief Engineer Rodriguez brought over a damaged plasma conduit that had been puzzling her team for days. "If your pet is really as smart as you claim," Rodriguez said skeptically, "let's see him figure this out." Marcus placed the conduit on his workbench and stepped back. Blaze approached cautiously, sniffing at the device before beginning a systematic examination. He traced the external housing with his nose, identifying the precise location where the internal damage had occurred. Then he walked over to Marcus's parts bins and began selecting specific components: a new power coupling, a section of plasma tubing, and a micro-regulator that Marcus wouldn't have thought to use. Within minutes, Blaze had laid out everything needed for the repair in the exact order they would need to be installed. Rodriguez stared in stunned silence as the wolf pup then walked over to the computer terminal and pulled up the technical manual for the specific conduit model. "This is impossible," Rodriguez breathed. "He's performing diagnostic analysis at the level of a senior engineer." But Blaze wasn't finished. He began making soft vocalizations, not quite barks but complex sounds that seemed to carry meaning. Marcus found himself understanding somehow, as if the wolf was explaining his reasoning for each component choice. "He's telling us about the failure cascade," Marcus realized. "The plasma overflow caused secondary damage to the regulator array, which is why a simple coupling replacement won't work." Rodriguez ran the repair exactly as Blaze had indicated, and the conduit functioned perfectly. Word spread throughout the station, and soon engineers from every department were bringing their most challenging problems to the human mechanic and his remarkable wolf companion. Captain Elena Vasquez, The station commander arrived unannounced one morning while Marcus was working on a particularly complex navigation computer. Blaze had been helping by highlighting relevant code sections on the diagnostic display when Vasquez walked into the repair shop. "Mr. Chen," she said formally, "I need to speak with you about your pet." Marcus straightened, immediately defensive. "Blaze isn't causing any problems. He's been helping with repairs." "That's exactly what I want to discuss," Vasquez replied, her expression unreadable. "I've been receiving reports about a wolf that can apparently diagnose technical malfunctions better than my senior staff. Some of my people are beginning to question whether this creature is really just an animal." Blaze had been listening to the conversation with obvious interest. Now he approached Captain Vasquez directly, sitting down in front of her and meeting her gaze with calm confidence. There was something almost formal about the gesture, as if he was presenting himself for inspection. Vasquez crouched down to examine him more closely. "Those eyes," she murmured. "I've seen that look before, in the mirror when I'm making command decisions." "That's not animal intelligence, I know," Marcus admitted. "I've suspected it for weeks, but I wasn't sure anyone would believe me. The question is, what do we do about it?" Vasquez stood up, her expression troubled. "If this creature is truly sentient, then keeping him as a pet would be slavery," Marcus finished quietly. "I know, but what's the alternative? If I let him go, someone else will just capture him again. At least here, he's safe." Blaze had been following their conversation with obvious understanding. Now he walked over to the computer terminal and began typing with his paws. The message that appeared on the screen made both humans stare in shock. "I choose to stay with Marcus. He is my pack." Captain Vasquez sank into a chair, her face pale. "He can write. A wolf pup who's maybe 2 months old can write in galactic standard." Marcus felt a mixture of pride and overwhelming responsibility. Blaze wasn't just intelligent. He was possibly more intelligent than most adult aliens Marcus had encountered. And somehow this remarkable being had chosen to trust him completely. "What happens now?" Marcus asked. Before Vasquez could answer, Blaze had typed another message. "I want to help. Humans understand pack loyalty. Others do not." The captain read the message several times before speaking. "I think," she said slowly, "we're going to need to have a very different conversation about the future of this station, and about what it means to be part of a pack." Blaze's tail wagged, and those brilliant blue eyes seemed to sparkle with something that looked remarkably like hope. The arrival of the Galactic Inspection Team 3 days later sent ripples of tension throughout the station. Captain Vasquez had managed to keep news of Blaze's abilities contained within her senior staff, but someone had talked. Now a delegation of council representatives was demanding to examine what they called the anomalous Fenrisian specimen. Marcus watched from his workshop window as the inspection ship docked. The team consisted of 3 aliens, a tall, imposing Zentorian with metallic skin and cold yellow eyes, a squat Balerian whose tentacles writhed constantly as he moved, and a ethereal crystalline whose translucent body sparkled with internal light. All 3 species were known for their rigid adherence to Galactic Council protocols. "They're here for me," Blaze typed on the computer terminal, his expression calm despite the gravity of the situation. "They want to study me." Marcus knelt beside his friend, placing a gentle hand on Blaze's back. The wolf had grown considerably over the past month and now stood nearly 2 feet tall, but he still seemed impossibly young to be facing such scrutiny. "We won't let them take you," Marcus promised. "You're part of our pack now." Blaze's tail wagged once, but his eyes remained fixed on the docking bay where the inspection team was disembarking. "They do not understand pack bonds. To them, I am property." Captain Vasquez arrived at the workshop 20 minutes later, her face grim. "They're invoking Regulation 47 Alpha," she announced without preamble. "Any potentially sentient species discovered in illegal circumstances must be surrendered for proper evaluation and placement." "Placement where?" Marcus demanded. "Probably a research facility," Vasquez admitted reluctantly. "They'll want to study how he developed such advanced cognitive abilities at such a young age." Blaze had been listening intently. Now he walked over to the terminal and began typing rapidly. "I was not illegal. Marcus purchased me legally. Bill of sale on file." The Zentorian inspector, who had entered the workshop during Blaze's typing, read the message with obvious surprise. "Fascinating. The creature appears to understand legal concepts. His name is Blaze, Marcus said firmly. And he's not a creature, he's a person. The inspector's yellow eyes fixed on Marcus with cold disdain. Humans are not qualified to make determinations about sentience. That is why the council exists. Blaze stepped forward, placing himself between Marcus and the inspector. Despite being a fraction of the alien's size, there was nothing submissive about his posture. He looked up at the Zentarian with steady confidence and began typing on a portable terminal that Captain Vasquez had brought. I am Blaze of the Marcus Pack. I claim protection under galactic law. 23 Echo. The right of sentient beings to choose their own associations. The inspector read the message, his metallic features shifting into what might have been confusion. Law 23 Echo applies only to recognized sentient species. Fenrisian wolves are classified as non-sentient fauna. Then your classification is wrong, Blaze typed without hesitation. I think, therefore I am sentient. I choose, therefore I am free. The Balerian inspector waddled forward, his tentacles writhing with apparent agitation. Impressive mimicry, he burbled through his translator. But complex behavior can be programmed. We must conduct proper neurological scans to determine true consciousness levels. Blaze's response appeared instantly on the screen. Will you submit to neurological scans to prove your own sentience? Or do you assume consciousness based on species classification alone? The crystalline inspector, who had remained silent until now, pulsed with soft blue light. When she spoke, her voice had an ethereal quality that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The youngling poses interesting philosophical questions. Perhaps we should hear his full argument before proceeding with invasive testing. Marcus felt a surge of hope. Crystallines were known for their logical approach to complex problems. If anyone would give Blaze a fair hearing, it would be her. Blaze seemed to sense the opportunity. He sat down formally and began typing an extended message that appeared in segments on the screen. I am Blaze. I was born on Fenris to a pack that was destroyed by slavers. I remember my mother's songs and my littermates. Play. I learned quickly because survival required adaptation. When Marcus freed me from the auction, I chose to bond with him, not from instinct, but from gratitude and recognition of his character. Pack bonds are sacred to my species. They are chosen, not imposed. I study technical manuals because understanding helps me contribute to my pack's success. I solve engineering problems because my unique perspective adds value. I communicate through typing because it bridges the gap between species. If I am not sentient, then explain my capacity for abstract thought. If I am not free, then explain my choice to stay with humans when I could attempt escape. If I am not a person, then explain why you feel the need to justify taking me against my will. The workshop fell silent as the three inspectors read Blaze's statement. The Zentarian's yellow eyes had lost some of their coldness, while the Balerian's tentacles had stopped their constant writhing. Even Captain Vasquez seemed moved by the eloquent plea. The crystalline inspector pulsed with rainbow colors for several moments before speaking. Youngling Blaze, your argument is compelling, but the Council operates on established protocols. Even if we accept your sentience, your age presents complications. Juvenile sentience requires specialized care and education. Blaze's tail drooped slightly, but he continued typing. I am receiving education from Marcus and his pack. I learn more each day. Is growth not the purpose of youth? Marcus stepped forward, his heart pounding. Blaze is part of our family now. We're not just going to hand him over to be studied like a lab specimen. He's shown nothing but loyalty and intelligence since the day I brought him home. The Zentarian inspector looked from Marcus to Blaze and back again. Human emotional attachment does not override council authority. But the crystalline was studying Blaze with obvious fascination. Tell me, young one, what do you hope to achieve with your life? Blaze's response appeared quickly. I want to bridge the gap between species, to show that intelligence takes many forms, to prove that pack bonds can transcend biological differences, to help my human family succeed and prosper. The inspector's crystalline form pulsed with warm golden light. Noble goals for one so young, perhaps. Perhaps there is another way to handle this situation. The crystalline inspector's proposal was unprecedented in Galactic Council history. Instead of removing Blaze for study, She suggested establishing the station as a pilot program for interspecies integration. Blaze would remain with Marcus, but their partnership would be monitored and documented as a case study in cross-species cooperation. The Council has long debated the theoretical possibilities of true interspecies bonds, the crystalline explained, her form pulsing with thoughtful purple light. Young Blaze and his human pack represent a unique opportunity to study these bonds in practice. The Zentorian inspector remained skeptical. This is highly irregular. The creature should be in a proper facility with xenobiologists and behavioral specialists. I have studied under the greatest minds in the galaxy, Blaze typed calmly, but I have learned more about cooperation and loyalty from Marcus in 1 month than most beings learn in a lifetime. The Balerian waddled closer to examine Blaze more carefully. The cognitive development is remarkable, he admitted grudgingly. Neurological scans would be valuable, but perhaps they could be conducted here with the subject's consent. Marcus watched nervously as Blaze considered this. The wolf had grown tremendously over the past month, not just physically but emotionally. He'd gone from a terrified pup to a confident young being who could hold his own in philosophical debates with council inspectors. I will submit to non-invasive scans, Blaze finally typed, but only with Marcus present. Pack bonds require trust, and trust requires transparency. Over the following week, the station became a hub of scientific activity. Researchers arrived daily to observe Blaze's interactions with the human crew. Some came expecting to debunk claims of his intelligence, but most left convinced they were witnessing something extraordinary. Dr. Sarah Chen, a xenopsychologist from Earth, spent hours interviewing both Marcus and Blaze about their bond. What I'm seeing here challenges everything we thought we knew about interspecies relationships, she confided to Marcus during a break between sessions. Blaze had grown to enjoy these conversations. He seemed to understand that he was representing not just himself, but the potential for his entire species. His responses to the researchers' questions were thoughtful and nuanced, often incorporating concepts from multiple fields of study. When Dr. Valix, a renowned Andromedan behavioral scientist, asked about Blaze's emotional development, the young wolf provided an answer that stunned everyone present. Emotions are not unique to any single species. Fear, joy, loyalty, curiosity, these are universal experiences. The difference is in how we express and channel these feelings. Humans express loyalty through words and actions. Wolves express it through pack behaviors, but the underlying emotion is the same. Dr. Valix's tentacles quivered with excitement. This level of emotional intelligence in such a young being suggests that Fenrisian cognitive development may be exponentially faster than we previously understood. The real test came when Captain Torres of the merchant vessel Stellar Pride brought a damaged quantum drive to the station. The drive had been malfunctioning for weeks, and 3 different repair facilities had failed to identify the problem. Torres was known throughout the sector as a difficult customer who didn't tolerate incompetence. I heard you've got some kind of wonder pup who can fix anything, Torres said skeptically when he arrived at Marcus's workshop. But if this is some kind of scam, see for yourself, Marcus replied, gesturing to where Blaze was already examining the quantum drive. The wolf had grown considerably and now stood nearly 3 feet tall, his white fur gleaming under the workshop lights. Blaze circled the drive slowly, his sensitive nose detecting traces of energy residue that scanners couldn't pick up. After several minutes, he sat down at the computer terminal and began typing. Quantum resonance chamber has microfractures causing phase variance. Fractures too small for standard sensors but create harmonic distortions. Solution: realign crystal matrix with 0.3 degree compensation for gravitational drift. Torres read the diagnosis with growing amazement. That's exactly what I suspected, but every technician I consulted said the resonance chamber was fine. Marcus began implementing Blaze's solution while the wolf continued his analysis. Within 2 hours, the quantum drive was running more smoothly than it had in years. Torres paid double the quoted fee without complaint and left spreading word about the human-wolf engineering team throughout the trade networks. As Blaze's reputation grew, so did the requests for his help. Mining operations brought him samples of unusual ore deposits to analyze. Agricultural stations consulted him about crop failures on alien worlds. Even military vessels sought his expertise with their most complex systems. But perhaps the most significant development was how other species began to regard Blaze himself. Where once they saw him as an unusual pet or an interesting anomaly, they now spoke to him directly, recognizing him as an individual with his own thoughts and opinions. Commander Zarak, a proud Klingon-like warrior from the hegemony, arrived at the station seeking Blaze's help with a tactical problem. Instead of addressing Marcus, he spoke directly to the wolf with the same respect he would show any fellow officer. "Young strategist," Zarak rumbled in his deep voice, "my fleet faces an enemy that adapts to our tactics faster than we can change them. Your unique perspective might provide the insight we need." Blaze's response showed his growing maturity and wisdom. Adaptation is not just about changing tactics, it is about understanding your opponent's fundamental nature. What drives them? What do they fear? What do they value? Answer these questions and their adaptations become predictable. Commander Zarak listened intently as Blaze outlined a strategy based on psychological warfare rather than brute force. The approach was elegant in its simplicity and demonstrated a level of strategic thinking that impressed even the battle-hardened commander. As the weeks passed, Marcus realized that his role in Blaze's life was evolving. He was no longer just a rescuer or a caretaker, but a true partner. They worked together as equals, each bringing their unique strengths to every challenge they faced. The greatest validation came when the Galactic Council formally recognized Blaze as the first known sentient Fenrisian wolf and granted him provisional citizenship rights. The ceremony was broadcast across the galaxy, showing millions of beings that intelligence and worth weren't limited to traditionally recognized species. Standing beside Marcus during the ceremony, Blaze had typed a message that was read aloud by the crystalline inspector who had first advocated for him. "Today we prove that family is not defined by species, but by choice. That intelligence is not measured by origin, but by actions, and that the greatest strength of any civilization is its willingness to embrace those who are different. I am proud to be part of the Marcus Pack, and honored to represent the possibility of a future where all beings are judged by their character, rather than their genetics." 6 months after his formal recognition by the Galactic Council, Blaze had grown into a magnificent creature. Standing nearly 4 feet tall at the shoulder, his pure white coat gleamed like starlight, and his ice-blue eyes held depths of wisdom that seemed impossible for someone so young. But it was his mind that truly set him apart from anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Marcus-Blaze engineering partnership had become legendary throughout the Outer Rim. Their workshop on Xerion Prime had expanded into a full facility, employing dozens of technicians from multiple species. But their greatest achievement wasn't commercial success. It was the way they had fundamentally changed how different species interacted with each other. Marcus watched with pride as Blaze conducted a training session for new employees. The wolf had developed his own teaching methodology, combining human engineering principles with Fenrisian pack dynamics to create teams that worked together with unprecedented efficiency. Remember, Blaze's synthesized voice came through the workshop's speakers. He had recently begun using vocal translation software to supplement his typing. Every being brings unique perspectives to problem-solving. Korans excel at pattern recognition. Thraxians have superior spatial reasoning. Humans demonstrate exceptional creativity under pressure. The goal is not to make everyone think the same way, but to harmonize different thinking styles. A young Andromedan technician raised one of her tentacles. "But how do we overcome communication barriers when working under stress?" Blaze's response was immediate and practical. "Pack communication is about more than words. Watch your teammates' body language. Listen to their breathing patterns. Learn to recognize when someone is frustrated before they voice it. Anticipate needs rather than waiting for requests." Marcus smiled as he remembered asking Blaze similar questions months ago. The wolf had not only mastered interspecies cooperation himself, but had become a teacher helping others achieve the same harmony. The real test of Blaze's impact came when the hegemony wars erupted in the neighboring sector. 3 major alien civilizations had fallen into a conflict that threatened to spread throughout the galaxy. Traditional diplomatic efforts had failed, and military intervention was being considered. The call came from Admiral Chen of the Earth Defense Fleet, Marcus's sister, and one of the few high-ranking officers who believed in Blaze's abilities. "Marcus, we need you and Blaze at the peace talks on Diplomatic Station 1, Elena's image said from the holographic display. The various species can't even agree on basic negotiation protocols. They're talking past each other, and we're running out of time before this becomes a full-scale galactic war." Blaze had been listening from his favorite spot near the Quantum Drive Diagnostic Station. "We will come," he said through the vocal synthesizer, "but not as mediators, as examples." The journey to Diplomatic Station 1 took 3 days aboard the fastest courier ship Marcus could charter. During the trip, Blaze spent most of his time studying the cultural files of the 3 warring civilizations: the militaristic Valdorians, the territorial Nexari, and the resource-hungry Krellian collective. Each species sees the conflict through their own cultural lens, Blaze explained to Marcus as they reviewed the diplomatic briefings. The Valdorians view it as a test of honor. The Nexari see it as an invasion of their ancestral territory. The Krellians consider it a competition for survival resources. None of them understand how their actions appear to the others. When they arrived at the diplomatic station, they found the peace talks in complete disarray. The 3 alien delegations had segregated themselves into separate sections of the station and were refusing to meet in the same room. Human mediators were shuttling between groups, making no progress. Ambassador Harrison, the chief negotiator, looked exhausted when he met Marcus and Blaze at the docking bay. "I've been trying to get them to agree on a basic agenda for 2 weeks," he admitted. "Every proposal is rejected before we even discuss the details." Blaze studied the station layout on a nearby display terminal. "The problem is the setting," he announced. "You are trying to force pack animals to behave like solitary hunters. This will not work. What do you suggest?" Ambassador Harrison asked. Instead of answering directly, Blaze walked over to the central commons area where representatives from all 3 species were visible, but maintaining careful distances from each other. He sat down in the exact center of the space and began what could only be described as a performance. First, he accessed the station's main computer and began displaying technical schematics on every available screen. But these weren't random diagrams. They were the engineering specifications for each species' spacecraft, showing detailed comparisons of their different approaches to the same technological challenges. The Valdorian ships emphasized durability and firepower. The Nexari vessels prioritized speed and maneuverability. The Krellian designs focused on efficiency and resource conservation. But Blaze's analysis showed how each approach had strengths that the others lacked. "Observe," Blaze's voice carried clearly through the commons area. 3 different solutions to the challenge of interstellar travel. Each reflects the values and needs of its creators. None is inherently superior. Each has applications where it excels. Slowly, representatives from all 3 species began moving closer to see the displays more clearly. Blaze continued his presentation, showing how the different technologies could be combined to create hybrid designs that were superior to any single approach. A Valdorian engineer was the first to speak. "Your analysis of our armor plating efficiency is incorrect. The titanium steel composite provides 23% better protection than your calculations show." A Nexari designer immediately contradicted him. "Protection means nothing if you cannot evade incoming fire. Speed is the ultimate defense. Both perspectives have merit," Blaze interjected calmly. "But you are debating applications rather than underlying principles. What if we combined Valdorian defensive technology with Nexari propulsion systems and Krellian resource optimization?" Before anyone could object, Blaze had produced a hybrid design that incorporated elements from all 3 civilizations. The specifications showed a vessel that was simultaneously more durable, faster, and more efficient than anything any single species had produced. The 3 engineers found themselves drawn into a technical discussion that quickly grew animated but remained respectful. They were no longer representatives of warring factions. They were professionals sharing expertise with colleagues who understood their passion for innovation. Marcus watched in amazement as Blaze systematically broke down the barriers between the groups. The wolf moved from engineering to agriculture to resource management, always showing how the different species' approaches could complement rather than compete with each other. Within hours, the segregated delegations had merged into mixed working groups focused on specific technical challenges. They were still negotiating, but now they were negotiating as collaborators trying to solve mutual problems, rather than enemies dividing up spoils. Ambassador Harrison found Marcus later that evening, his expression one of amazed relief. "I've never seen anything like it. They've agreed to a joint technology-sharing initiative that could benefit all three civilizations. The territorial disputes are starting to look like resource allocation challenges rather than existential threats." Blaze had curled up in a corner of the commons area, but his ears perked up at the conversation. "Conflict often arises from scarcity thinking," he observed. "When beings believe resources are limited, they compete. When they realize that cooperation can expand resources, they collaborate." The peace talks continued for another week, but the fundamental breakthrough had occurred in those first few hours. By the time the formal treaties were signed, the three species had not only ended their conflict, but had established the framework for an unprecedented alliance based on technological cooperation. As their ship departed Diplomatic Station 1, Marcus reflected on how far they had both come since that day in the slave market. Blaze was no longer the terrified pup he had rescued. He had become a bridge between species, a living example of what was possible when intelligence was valued over origin. "What's our next challenge?" Marcus asked as they settled in for the journey home. Blaze's tail wagged with anticipation. "I have been thinking about the Andromedans' request for help with their stellar engineering project. It will require cooperation between 17 different species, each with their own technological traditions." Marcus grinned. If anyone could orchestrate that kind of complex collaboration, it would be his pack brother. The galaxy was becoming a more connected place, one impossible partnership at a time. 2 years had passed since the historic peace talks, and the galaxy had never been the same. The Marcus-Blaze partnership had evolved into something far greater than anyone could have imagined. The Galactic Cooperation Institute, headquartered on a massive space station that orbited the neutral zone between 3 major star systems. Marcus stood on the observation deck of the Institute's main facility, watching as ships from dozens of different species docked at the various bays. Each vessel brought new challenges, new opportunities for the kind of cooperation that had once seemed impossible. Beside him, Blaze had grown into a magnificent adult wolf, his white coat now bearing the subtle silver markings of maturity, his blue eyes holding the wisdom of someone who had bridged gaps between civilizations. The Andromedans' stellar engineering project was just completed, Blaze reported, his voice coming through the neural interface headset he now preferred to vocal synthesizers. The technology allowed for more nuanced communication, transmitting not just words but emotional context and complex technical concepts. 17 species working together to stabilize a dying star. The energy output will power their entire sector for the next 1,000 years. Marcus smiled with pride. And the Krellian Nexari Agricultural Initiative exceeded all projections. The hybrid crop strains are producing 300% higher yields while using 60% fewer resources. Food scarcity in the Outer Rim will be eliminated within 5 years. These successes had become routine for the Institute, but Marcus never lost his sense of wonder at what they had accomplished. What had started as one human rescuing one wolf pup had grown into a movement that was reshaping galactic civilization. The real transformation, however, was in how different species now viewed each other. The old hierarchies based on military power or technological advancement had given way to a more complex understanding that valued each species' unique contributions. Humans were recognized for their adaptability and emotional intelligence. Crystallines were valued for their logic and long-term perspective. Even previously marginalized species like the insectoid Vex had found their place as master coordinators of complex multi-species projects. "Marcus," came a familiar voice from behind them. Captain Elena Vasquez, now Admiral of the Cooperative Defense Fleet, approached with her usual purposeful stride. She had been promoted after successfully implementing Blaze's revolutionary defense strategies throughout the human territories. "Elena," Marcus greeted his old friend warmly. "What brings you to the Institute?" Her expression was serious. "We've received a distress signal from the far rim. A species called the Zephins are under attack by something they call the Silence. Their entire civilization is on the verge of extinction." Blaze's ears perked up with immediate interest. "The Zephins? I have heard whispers about them. They are an ancient species, very isolationist. For them to request help means the threat must be unprecedented." Admiral Vasquez nodded grimly. According to their transmission, the silence isn't just destroying their worlds, it's erasing them. No debris, no survivors, no trace that they ever existed. 12 star systems have already been completely eliminated. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. What kind of force could do something like that? That's what we need to find out, Vasquez replied. But the Zephans won't accept help from any single species. They're demanding a truly representative coalition. Every major civilization working together under unified command. Blaze was already accessing the Institute's massive database, his enhanced neural interface allowing him to process information at incredible speeds. The Zephans have good reason for their caution. Their last contact with galactic civilization was 3,000 years ago, when they were nearly enslaved by an alliance of aggressive species. They retreated to the far rim and have been hiding ever since. Can it be done? Vasquez asked. A unified fleet with ships and crews from every major civilization? It has never been attempted, Blaze admitted. The logistics alone would be staggering. Different species use incompatible technologies, follow different command structures, operate under different tactical philosophies. The potential for catastrophic miscommunication would be enormous. Marcus looked out at the ships docked around the station. Valdorian warships, with their angular armor plating, graceful Nexari cruisers that seemed to flow like liquid metal, massive Krellian carriers that resembled floating cities. Each represented not just advanced technology, but centuries of cultural evolution and military tradition. But if anyone could coordinate something like this, Marcus said slowly, it would be you, Blaze. The wolf was quiet for a long moment, his blue eyes reflecting the starlight streaming through the observation deck's transparasteel windows. The challenge is not technical, he finally said. Ships can be retrofitted for compatibility. Communication protocols can be established. Tactical doctrine can be unified. The real challenge is psychological, meaning, Vasquez prompted. Each species will need to trust their survival to beings they have barely begun to understand. Humans will need to follow crystalline battle plans. Valdorians will need to accept Nexari reconnaissance reports. Andromedan engineers will need to work alongside Krellian mechanics in the same engine rooms. The level of trust required is beyond anything we have achieved before. Marcus watched a small maintenance shuttle pilot expertly navigate between the much larger ships around the station. The pilot was Vex, one of the insectoid species that had found new purpose coordinating complex operations. A year ago, most humans would have instinctively distrusted working with the spider-like aliens. Now Vex coordinators were sought after throughout the galaxy for their unmatched ability to manage multiple simultaneous tasks. We've done it before, Marcus pointed out. Remember the hegemony peace talks? 3 species that had been trying to exterminate each other ended up creating the most successful alliance in galactic history. This is different, Blaze warned. The stakes are absolute. If we fail, an entire civilization dies and the silence continues its expansion. Eventually, it will reach the core systems. Everyone we have worked to bring together could be erased from existence. Admiral Vasquez studied both of them carefully. So you're saying it's impossible? Blaze's tail wagged once, a gesture Marcus recognized as his friend's equivalent of a grin. No, I am saying it is the greatest challenge we have ever faced, and therefore the most important. Over the following days, the Institute became a hub of frantic activity as representatives from every major civilization converged to plan the unprecedented mission. The debates were intense, sometimes heated, but they were the debates of allies trying to solve a mutual problem, rather than enemies protecting their interests. The breakthrough came when Blaze proposed abandoning traditional military hierarchies altogether. Instead of a single supreme commander, the fleet would operate under a collective consciousness model inspired by Vex hive mind principles, but adapted for individualistic species. Each ship maintains autonomy for local decisions, Blaze explained to the assembled delegates, but strategic coordination occurs through real-time neural linking between command staff. Human intuition, crystalline logic, Valdorian tactical expertise, Nexari speed, Krellian efficiency all working. As a single collective intelligence, while preserving individual identity, the technology existed. Neural interface networks, developed by the Institute, had been used successfully in smaller projects, but the scale of what Blaze was proposing was staggering. A fleet of 10,000 ships from 30 different species, all linked into a single cooperative command structure. Commander Zarek, Now an elderly warrior who had become one of Blaze's most devoted students, was the first to volunteer. If the pup believes it can work, I will stake my honor on it. The hegemony pledges our full fleet to this venture. One by one, the other species added their support. The Crystalline Collective committed their most advanced science vessels. The Nexari offered their entire scout fleet. Even the reclusive ethereals, who rarely involved themselves in galactic affairs, pledged a squadron of their mysterious phase ships. As the massive fleet assembled in the outer system, Marcus realized they were witnessing the birth of something entirely new. Not just a military force, but a new form of galactic civilization based on true cooperation rather than dominance. Standing beside Blaze on the bridge of their command ship, Marcus watched as neural link connections were established between thousands of minds across hundreds of species. The sensation was overwhelming. Suddenly he could feel the calm logic of crystalline thought, the fierce loyalty of Valdorian honor, the patient determination of Krellian persistence, all blending with human creativity and Fenrisian pack instincts. "Ready to save a civilization?" Blaze asked, his mental voice carrying the emotional resonance that made him such an effective leader. "Ready to save them all," Marcus replied, feeling the collective agreement of thousands of allied minds as the greatest fleet in galactic history jumped into hyperspace toward the unknown threat called the Silence. Whatever they found at the far rim, they would face it together, human and wolf, individual and collective, different species united by the simple truth that intelligence and courage were not limited by the accident of evolution. In that moment,